jQuery, and you notice that in jQuery, a lot of the function calls that you call expect one or more functions, callback functions, for you to pass in there. Now that is asynchronous. jQuery is implementing synchronicity that way, but this is more of a standard way of implementing asynchronicity, where instead of having to pass a lot of callbacks into a function and then possibly on the same line having to pass even more callbacks into a parent function, we can then, because you see the then function that hangs off of a promise itself returns a promise. Okay? So I can do something that might take some time, and then when it's done, I can .then, and then when that thing is done, I could .then again, and I can continue to do that. So this implementation does a .then and says, whenever we're complete with this asynchronous promise, I want to update the progress bar to 100%. So once again, when I click on Start, I need a reset on that, don't I? Oops. When I click on Start, it should start that, and then 2, 3, complete. Okay? It doesn't do it until we're done. Now the next example, beyond consuming a promise, is passing on a promise. That's implemented here in the code. You can take a look. Now in this code, remember Michael showed us that we can define a function inside of a function. That's exactly what we're doing here. And I'm making this function just called my async function. I know that this is async because I'm writing the function, and I know what's going to be returned from this function. That is a promise. And I know it's going to be a promise because I'm just returning whatever it is that long task async promise returns, and it returns to me a promise. So I'm calling an asynchronous function. It's giving me a promise. I'm passing that promise on to my caller. That caller now has a hold of the promise that my embedded function call gave to me. And it can ask any time by using the then function if that promise has finished yet, and when it does, it can run the specified function. Okay?
That's cool.
So yeah, so to complete this progress bar now, I'm doing a .then off of my async function. And to follow a naming convention, I actually probably should have ended these function names with async, because that's the convention. You'll find that in the WinRT API. If it returns a promise, it ends with async. So you can always know what to expect there. So that's passing on a promise. We didn't have to do too much except know that some asynchronous call returns a promise and return that. And then we know that we ourselves are an asynchronous function. And that works just the same. 2, 3, bam. Passing on a promise. Sweet. Now we get a little bit more complicated. Not too much. Not too much. It's not too big of a concept to wrap your head around. We're going to create our own promise. So this means that we're going to do something. We know that it's going to take some time, and we don't want the user to do anything with the results until such time as our promise is complete. So we start out inside of our async function saying, I want to create a new Win.js promise. And in fact, this is what I'm going to return. So my new Win.js promise is expecting me to give it a function. And that function needs to have 3 parameters. C, which stands for complete, E, which stands for an errant or exceptional case, and P, which stands for progress. Now this means that inside the context of this function here, I can call those functions C, E, and P, and I have control over completing that promise, or reporting that that promise had a problem and it's in error mode, or reporting some progress on that promise. So inside my promise, inside the function that I'm passing in, I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to call, we learned the try-catch pattern, I'm going to try to call an async method, and then if this function fires, that means that the then happened. That means that our embedded asynchronous call has come back successful, and now I know that we can complete our promise. And I do that by calling the C function that was referenced here. If I wanted to throw an error case, I would call the E, and that's exactly what I do down here. So now I'm saying, if any sort of an error happens, catch that down here. And now I want to I don't want to throw that error to the main thread. I just want to report to this promise that there was an error inside the promise and give whoever is using that promise the opportunity to respond to the error in the way that they so choose.
Yeah.
Okay? And then anytime I want. If, for instance, something had occurred and I know that I'm 10% done, I could then call P, and I could report back in P some status about some progress that's been made in this promise. Now, this promise won't report that it's complete yet, but that event will fire that progress has happened, and I'll be able to capture that. I'll show you that code in just a minute. The last one, and let's just show that this one works exactly the same way. 2, 3, bam. And finally, a stored promise.